Hello, and welcome to my Criminology oral presentation. In this presentation, I will be explaining and supporting the theory I have come up with to explain crime based on the information we have learned in this class. Let's begin. First of all, there are three perspectives that criminologists use to look at crime. The first is biological. Biological perspective looks at how genetics and uncontrollable factors contribute to crime. The biological perspectives takes the nature side of nature versus nurture. Criminologists who use a strictly biological perspective might explain someone's criminality by looking at the criminality of their parents. The next perspective, a sociological perspective, looks at how outside factors contribute to crime. The sociological perspective takes the nurture side of nature versus nurture. Criminologists using a sociological perspective might explain crime through experiences the criminal had, like bullying or a negative environment. The last perspective is a psychological perspective. This perspective looks at how mental health and mental processes contribute to crime. Criminologists looking at crime from a psychological perspective might examine the mental health of a criminal and determine whether that caused them to contribute to crime. Now let's get into my theory of crime. My theory of crime is that crime is caused by a lack of positive support in childhood and adolescence. This theory looks at crime from a sociological perspective. My theory looks into the environment around a growing child and how it contributes to crime. Therefore, my theory looks at crime from a sociological perspective. This theory also uses a psychological perspective slightly when examining the future consequences of negative support around a childhood or an adolescent, but it mainly looks at crime from a sociological perspective, their environment. Let's begin with things that create a negative environment around children and adolescents, beginning with single-parent households. Children with fatherless families are 3 times more likely to end up in prison. Single-parent households have a poverty rate of almost 46%, 5 times higher than 2-parent households. This is significant because households in areas with a higher poverty rate have a higher crime rate, and poverty contributes greatly to crime. States with a lower percentage of single parents have a lower crime rate and also a lower poverty rate, as these things go hand in hand. Abandonment is another thing that can impact a child or adolescent. They abandoned by their mothers have a reduced capacity for emotional attachment or empathy. These two things are extremely important for functioning in society, and the lack of these two things are strong criminal traits. Children abandoned by their fathers can have issues with aggression and violence. This can lead to delinquency and distance from peers. Aggressive children not only become delinquents, but they are not wanted by their peers and coworkers. This creates even more anger and makes the abandoned child an outcast from society. This makes them even more likely to commit a crime. Another damaging thing is abuse. 14% of men and 36% of women in prison had been abused as a child, which is twice the national average. Children who experience abuse and neglect are approximately 9 times more likely to be involved in criminal activity. Abused adolescents are over 3 times more likely to have substance abuse issues by the age of 18. This is significant because people with substance abuse issues are far more likely to commit crimes. Abuse victims are also over 10 times more likely to attempt suicide. An unsupportive environment does not stop outside the home. Bullying can be very damaging to a child and adolescent and cause them to commit crimes. 14% of bullied children exhibit delinquent behavior as adolescents, as opposed to 6% of not bullied children. People who are bullied continuously throughout childhood and adolescence are the most likely to become criminals. These statistics can be alarming, but not every victim of a poor childhood becomes a criminal. Many victims of a poor childhood exhibit abnormal behavior, but do not commit crimes. The victim's perspective on the abuse is very important to their recovery and whether they will commit a crime or not. If an abuse victim puts the blame on themselves and has shame for their abuse, they will not recover from it and therefore are more likely to commit a crime. But if they can accept that the abuse was the fault of the abuser, they are more likely to put it behind them. Furthermore, children and adolescents who experience multi-type maltreatment are more likely to become criminals. Multi-type maltreatment is abuse of a child in more than one way, like physical and mental abuse, as opposed to just emotional. Decreasing crime, according to my theory, is simple and complicated at the same time. The best way to decrease crime, according to my theory, is to support children and adolescents in difficult households and give them as much help as they need to recover and become active members of society. All schools should have a strict no bullying policy. This policy should be enforced strictly with harsh punishments on any child who bullies another child. Teachers should also be trained to look out for victims of bullying and abuse, and they should know how to get them help in a subtle way. Students should have a counselor available for free on campus. Support groups for survivors of abuse in poor childhoods should be readily available. Often, speaking to someone who has survived your situation can be very helpful in trying to recover from it. And that is my theory on crime, that crime is caused by a lack of positive support in childhood and adolescence. Thank you for watching.